The day my boss called me into his office, I had just sent the final sign-off email on an $18 million infrastructure project. My coffee was still hot. The cursor on my screen was still blinking next to the words "Project Complete." I hadn't even taken off my jacket yet. He didn't ask me to sit down. That was the first sign. My boss, a man I'd worked alongside for 11 years, a man I'd covered for during 2 failed product launches and 1 near-catastrophic budget overrun, folded his hands on his desk and looked somewhere just past my left shoulder. Not at me. Past me, like I was already gone. "We're making some structural changes," he said. I remember thinking the phrase was strange. Structural changes. Like I was a load-bearing wall they'd decided to move. "Effective today," he added. I stood there for a moment. Just stood there. My brain kept cycling back to the email I'd sent 20 minutes ago. The one with the green check mark. The one that had taken me 3 years to earn. "Effective today," I repeated back to him, just to make sure I'd heard it right. He nodded. Didn't look at me. There was an envelope on his desk. HR had already prepared it. That was the part that cut deepest, not the words, but the envelope. Because it meant this conversation had been scheduled. It meant while I was in the field managing subcontractors and fighting for permits and sleeping 4 hours a night to keep the project on deadline, someone in a conference room somewhere had already decided my last day would be the day after I crossed the finish line. I picked up the envelope. I said, "Thank you, I still don't know why," and I walked back to my desk. I packed a box. I said goodbye to the few people who caught my eye. And I drove home in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon with 31 years of construction project management experience and absolutely nowhere to be. My wife was in the kitchen when I walked in. She heard the door and called out that I was home early. Then she came around the corner and saw my face, and she didn't say anything else. She just pulled out a chair and sat down next to me at the table, and for a long time neither of us spoke. That night, after she'd gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with the envelope. I hadn't opened it yet. I poured 2 fingers of bourbon I didn't drink, and I just looked at the thing. Here's what you need to understand about where I was in my career. I had started at the company as a field supervisor 22 years earlier. I'd worked my way up through project manager, regional director, and finally VP of Infrastructure Development, a title I was given after I delivered the Hartwell Bridge expansion 14 months ahead of schedule and 6% under budget. The company had been featured in 3 industry publications. My boss had shaken my hand in front of the whole division. 2 years before any of this happened, when the company was restructuring its executive compensation, I'd been asked to accept a reduced base salary in exchange for a performance clause. The idea was straightforward. If I delivered on a major project defined in the contract as any project with a final contract value of $12 million or more, I would receive a performance bonus equal to 15% of my annual base salary for every full year I'd been with the company, paid as a lump sum upon successful completion. I was 53 years old at the time. I had been with the company for 19 years. I did the math when they offered it. 15% times 19 times my base. It was significant, more than significant, but it required project completion, and it required me to still be employed at the time of completion. I signed the contract. My lawyer looked it over first. He flagged one thing. "This clause here," he said, tapping a paragraph near the bottom of the performance section. "If you're terminated without cause after project commencement but before the bonus is paid, the full bonus amount still triggers. Automatically. The company can't withhold it by letting you go." I'd nodded and filed it away. That was 2 years ago. I opened the envelope. Inside was a standard separation agreement, 12 weeks of severance, a non-disparagement clause, a line releasing the company from any further financial obligations, and at the bottom, a signature line, with my name already typed underneath it. I read the release language twice. Then I got up, went to my home office, and pulled out my employment contract from the fireproof filing cabinet where I keep documents that matter. I sat back down at the kitchen table. I read the performance bonus clause 4 times. Then I called my lawyer. He picked up on the 3rd ring, which told me he was still awake, which was one of the many reasons I'd been using the same attorney for 15 years. "They let me go today," I said. A pause. "When?" "This afternoon, 3 hours after I submitted final completion documents on the Meridian Crossing project." Another pause. Longer this time. "The $18 million project." "Yes, Marcus." He said my name the way a man says something when he's trying to stay calm. "Did you bring your contract?" "I'm looking at it right now." "Read me the termination clause. Section 4, paragraph 3. I read it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Don't sign anything they sent you. Don't respond to any emails tonight. Get some sleep if you can. I'll call you tomorrow at 8. I didn't sleep. I spent most of the night reading. Not just my contract, the project files. 11 years of project files. Because when my lawyer called back in the morning, the first thing he said was that we needed to understand the full picture. They timed this, he said. The question is whether they timed it deliberately to avoid the bonus, or whether the timing was coincidental. I already knew the answer. I just needed documentation. Here's what I found. 6 weeks before my termination, my boss had hired a new VP of infrastructure development. The title was slightly different. They'd added the word strategic somewhere in the middle, but the job description was nearly identical to mine. I had heard about the hire and assumed it was an expansion. I had not been told it was a replacement. The new hire's first day was 3 weeks before my last. I printed everything. Offer letters I'd been copied on, org chart updates, internal announcements. I built a timeline on a yellow legal pad. The way I build project timelines start at the end and work backwards. The picture it painted was unambiguous. They had brought someone in to fill my role, waited until I completed the project, and then removed me to avoid triggering the performance bonus. The new hire was 29 years old and was being paid 60% of my salary. I'm not a man who yells. I never have been. I grew up in a household where my father said that a calm man in a crisis controls the room, and I have carried that with me my entire professional life. So when I saw what they had done, when the full scope of it settled into place, like a steel beam clicking into its bracket, I didn't pound the table. I didn't call anyone names. I took a long, slow breath, and I wrote down everything I needed to bring to my lawyer's office the next morning. My wife drove me. She sat in the waiting room while I sat across from my lawyer and spread the documents across his conference table. He went through them methodically, the way good lawyers do, slowly, precisely, without expression. When he finished, he looked up. They made a mistake, he said. Tell me. The termination clause in your contract doesn't include a carve-out for project completion bonuses. The performance bonus triggers upon project completion, defined as your submission of final documentation, which you did before they terminated you. The timeline actually works in your favor. You completed the project first. The bonus accrued. Then they let you go. What does that mean, practically? It means they owe you the bonus regardless of the separation. The release they sent you would have waived your right to claim it, which is why they included the language they did. But you haven't signed it. I told him I hadn't. Good. He folded his hands. Here's what I recommend. We send a formal demand letter. We lay out the timeline, the contract language, and the bonus calculation. We give them 14 business days to respond before we escalate. What's the number? I asked. He already knew what I meant. He turned his legal pad toward me. He'd done the math. 15% of my annual base salary, multiplied by 21 because my 21st work anniversary had fallen 2 months before termination, paid as a lump sum. The number had 7 digits. I looked at it for a long time. Send the letter, I said. The response came on day 11. It came from the company's general counsel, not my boss, which told me they'd escalated it internally. The letter was 6 pages long, written in the specific style of legal communication designed to be dense enough that most people stop reading after the first paragraph. I brought it straight to my lawyer. He read it in silence. Then he set it down. They're claiming the project doesn't meet the definition of completion under the contract because final sign-off from the client hasn't been received. I stared at him. Marcus, when did the client sign off? I have the email. It came in at 9:47 in the morning. My termination meeting was at 1:15 in the afternoon. He picked up his pen and wrote something down. Do you have the email? I slid a printed copy across the table. I had already highlighted the timestamp in the client's signature block. My lawyer looked at it. He looked at me. Then he did something I had never seen him do in 15 years. He smiled. They didn't check the timeline, he said. No, I said. They didn't. The second demand letter went out the following morning. It was 3 pages, and it attached the client's sign-off email, the final documentation submission, and a time-stamped record of my termination meeting. It laid out the sequence of events with the kind of precision that removes all ambiguity from a situation. It also noted that we were prepared to add a claim for bad faith termination if the matter was not resolved within 10 business days. Day 3, after the second letter, my boss called me. I let it go to voicemail. He called twice more. My lawyer called me on day 5. They want to meet, he said. In person? Yes. Their general counsel, their outside attorney, and apparently their CEO. That last part told me everything I needed to know about how seriously they were taking it. The CEO didn't come to termination disputes. The CEO came when the exposure was large enough to reach his desk. We met in a conference room at a hotel downtown, neutral ground. My lawyer had chosen the location deliberately. The CEO sat across from me. I had met him 3 times in my career, twice at company events, once when he came to the ribbon cutting for a project I'd managed in Phoenix. He was the kind of man who remembered facts about people and repeated them back in conversation to make you feel seen. He was very good at his job. He was not good at hiding the fact that he was worried. "Marcus," he said, "I want to start by saying I have a lot of respect for what you built with this company." I let the sentence sit there. "We're hoping we can find a resolution that works for everyone," he said. I had agreed with my lawyer beforehand that I would let him do the talking. I was there to be present. Presence was enough. My lawyer opened his folder. What followed was 2 hours of careful, precise negotiation. Their counsel argued that the termination had been a business decision, unrelated to the bonus. My lawyer presented the hiring timeline for the replacement VP. They argued that the timing was coincidental. My lawyer presented internal emails obtained legally through documents I had been copied on that showed my boss discussing transition planning 4 months before my termination. There was a moment, about 90 minutes in, when the CEO leaned back from the table and looked at the ceiling, just for a second. But I saw it. And I think he knew I saw it. He asked for a 15-minute recess. When they came back, their lead attorney placed a number on the table. It was lower than what we'd claimed. My lawyer shook his head. They went back and forth twice more. The final number was within 3% of our original demand. I didn't react. I looked at the table for a moment, then at my lawyer. He gave me a small nod. "There's one more thing," I said. It was the first time I'd spoken in 2 hours. Everyone looked at me. "I won't sign an NDA. The CEO frowned. "That's standard." "Not in my contract, it isn't," I said. I checked. "There's no NDA requirement. If you want to add one, we can renegotiate the number, but I'm not signing one at this amount." They asked for another recess. 15 minutes later, they agreed. No NDA. The money arrived by wire transfer 19 days later. I checked the balance, put my phone down on the kitchen counter, and stood there for a minute. My wife came in and looked at my face. "It's done?" she asked. "It's done." She put her arms around me, and we just stood in the kitchen for a while. We didn't say much. There wasn't much to say that the quiet didn't already cover. I want to tell you about 2 people before I finish. The first is a woman named Patricia, who had been my project coordinator on Meridian Crossing for all 3 years. Patricia had flagged 3 contract discrepancies in the first year of the project that, if overlooked, would have cost us an estimated $400,000 in penalties. She had done it quietly, without asking for recognition, because that was just how she worked. She had been laid off in the same round of cuts that took me out. She had a daughter in her 2nd year of college. I called Patricia 2 weeks after my settlement. I told her I wanted to offer her a contract position through the consulting practice I was in the process of setting up. The hourly rate I offered her was 40% higher than what the company had been paying her. She was quiet for a moment on the phone. "Why?" she asked. "Because you earned it 3 times over on Meridian," I said, "and because I can." The second person is a young man named Derek, a project engineer who had worked under me for 4 years and who had, on more than one occasion, stayed until midnight, helping me work through structural calculations when our original engineering firm fell behind. Derek had applied for a senior role 6 months before my termination and had been passed over in favor of an external candidate with half his experience. I called Derek too. I told him I was starting something new and I wanted people who knew what real project work looked like. He said yes before I finished the sentence. My consulting practice opened 8 months after that Tuesday afternoon when I walked out of the building with a cardboard box. We had 3 clients in the first quarter, 11 in the first year. 2 of them were former competitors of the company that had let me go. My former boss emailed me once, about 7 months after the settlement. The subject line was touching base. I read it once. It was 3 paragraphs of careful, diplomatic language that essentially asked whether I held any hard feelings. I closed the email and went back to the proposal I was writing. I don't think about that company very often, not because the memory doesn't exist, but because I stopped letting it occupy the kind of space it was trying to occupy. What they did was calculated. It was deliberate. And it failed not because I fought harder or yelled louder, but because I had a piece of paper I'd signed 2 years earlier, a lawyer I trusted, and enough presence of mind on the worst afternoon of my career to not sign anything until I understood exactly what I was giving up. The envelope they handed me was designed to be signed quickly. In the fog of a sudden termination, after a decade-long career, while the adrenaline is still making your hands shake, they were counting on me to sign it. Most people do. I understand why. When everything you've built feels like it's collapsing, the instinct is to grab the nearest solid thing. A severance package feels solid. 12 weeks of pay feels real. What you can't see in that moment is what you're trading for it. My lawyer told me something the first time I ever hired him, back when I was just a project manager dealing with a subcontractor dispute. He said that in his experience, most people lose not because they don't have a case, but because they don't know they have a case, or because they signed something before finding out. I have thought about that sentence a lot over the years. There's a version of this story where I walk back to my desk that Tuesday, pack my box, drive home, pour myself a drink, and sign the severance agreement that night because I'm tired and hurt and I just want the whole thing to be over. There's a version where I don't read the contract, where I don't call my lawyer, where I take the 12 weeks and move on. That version of the story has a very different ending. What I know now, what I want you to understand, if you take nothing else from this, is that your contract is not a formality. It is not boilerplate. It is a set of agreed-upon terms that two parties signed because it was in both of their interests at the time. When circumstances change, when the balance of power shifts, the contract is the only thing that stands between you and someone else's version of what you deserve. Read it. Keep it somewhere you can find it. Have someone who knows what they're looking at read it too. The Tuesday they let me go was the worst day I'd had in years. It was also the last day they had any power over me. Patricia just told me this morning that she's been offered a full-time partnership role in the practice. I told her to take the weekend to think about it. She called back in 20 minutes. Derek is leading our new infrastructure division. He's 31 years old, and he builds things that last. I drink my coffee while it's still hot now, and I always read everything before I sign it. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever felt the floor drop out from under you at a job, if you've ever been handed an envelope and told it was over, leave a comment. Tell me about it. I read every single one, and if you haven't already, hit subscribe. There are more stories coming, and every one of them ends the same way, with proof and patience, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing exactly what your signature is worth.